really appreciate it. I mean, this turnout, I think, just speaks volumes of our community and how engaged folks are with the political process. I love being able to go to the Capitol, we all do, and be able to brag about how engaged our constituents are, how we always have the highest voter turnout of any area in the state. So really, really appreciate it. My name is State Senator Ethan Corson. This is our 51st consecutive monthly town hall. So we were doing town halls way before it became cool. And I'll just give you our district boundaries for folks who aren't familiar with them. So we start just on the Johnson side of the Johnson-Wyandotte line on 47th Street. And then we go south to about 95th Street. And then we go from State Line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So we're kind of a big rectangle of northeast Johnson County. I want to start off by just kind of talking to you about where we are in the legislative session in terms of the legislative calendar. So what we just finished last week was both chambers, the House and the Senate, finished debating bills in their respective chambers. So you may remember last month we talked about how we were in turnaround time. So turnaround meant that we were in the process of the Senate was finishing up considering Senate bills and the House was finishing up considering House bills. What we've done since that time is all the bills that were passed by the House before turnaround have gone over to the Senate, and so the Senate has been able to consider the bills passed by the House. And then vice versa, all the bills that the Senate passed when we met last month before turnaround, all of those are now been considered for the past month by the House. So we finished up that work this week. So that's where we are in the legislative session. What we are doing next week is one of the most important and interesting weeks of the legislative session. It is when conference committees meet. So I'll explain a little bit about what a conference committee is. So a conference committee is made up of the chair, the vice chair, and the ranking member, which is essentially the senior Democrat for each committee. And so they will get together, those 3 members for the Senate, and those 3 members for the respective committee in the House. They will get together, and those three and three will negotiate the differences between the bills. So for example, imagine a bill starts in the Senate, it's considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee, it's passed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, it's passed by the Senate as a whole, and then it goes over to the House, and then the House Judiciary Committee looks at it, and they decide that they think that there are 2 places where they need to have amendments put on. So they would add 2 amendments. And then the House Judiciary Committee would pass it, and then the House as a whole would pass it. And so now you have 2 different versions of the same bill. You have one bill that was passed by the Senate without those amendments, and then you have the bill as it was passed by the House that added those amendments. So what would happen in that situation is the chair, the vice chair, and the ranking member of the House Judiciary and the Senate Judiciary would get together in what we call a conference committee, and they would try to work out what the differences are in those 2 bills, and then they would put it into what's called a conference committee report. And then that report has to go to each chamber and has to pass each chamber, because each chamber, for a bill to go to the governor, it has to be passed in identical form by each chamber. That is the real purpose of Conference Committee Week, is trying to resolve differences between bills as they came out of their respective House and Senate chambers. But it's also a time where a lot of deals are cut. It's also a time where there's kind of a lot of wrangling of leadership trying to, in both the House and Senate, trying to get various priorities accomplished. So it is not all schoolhouse rocks. It is also a time where there's a lot of deal making and a lot of arm twisting and a lot of politicking and wrangling And it is interesting in that when these conference committee reports come back to the full House and the full Senate to be voted on, they are not subject to any further amendments. So at that point, you get an up or down vote on what is in the conference committee report. So it is an enormous amount of power entrusted in leadership and entrusted in those 6 people that are members of the conference committee. Because once those conference committee reports come to us as a body as the whole, they cannot be amended. So I'm the ranking Democrat on the Senate Transportation Committee, the Senate Tax Committee, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I will be on those 3 conference committees this next week. I will stop there. Usually I want to save questions for the end, but does anybody have a burning question just about the process or kind of where we are in the legislative session? Or was that clear? About as clear as mud? Yes?
What about omnibus bills and gut and go bills?
So we don't have any more gut and go bills because, again, whatever comes to the floor this week cannot be amended. So the question was, can we do omnibus bills? Can we do gut and go bills? The answer is really no. Now, things can be wholly changed in conference committee. There's a lot of latitude for conference committee, so you can say, I want to take this language out of this bill and I want to put in this other language. So there's a lot of latitude that can happen in conference committees, but the floor is really a series of up or down votes, which I think makes it difficult for a lot of members because oftentimes bills get packaged together in one conference committee report, and there may be some bills in there that you like and some bills in there that you don't. So it's kind of a series of difficult votes for members because they'll often package together. We've tried to put a limit on it. They'll package together. It's supposed to be up to 5 bills, or what our rules provide, can be put together in one conference committee report. So after this week, we will adjourn for about a week and a half, and then all of the bills that are passed by both the House and Senate will then go to the governor, and then the governor has 10 days from when they arrive on her desk, and she can do one of 3 things. She can sign the bill into law. She can let the bill become law without signing it, which she does sometimes, and there's kind of strategic reasons why she might want to do that, or she could veto a bill. And then we will come back in about a week and a half, and we will have a short 2 or 3 day session where then leadership can bring up any bills that have been vetoed, and the legislature can attempt to override those vetoes, meaning have those bills become law even though they've been vetoed. And that takes a 2/3 vote in both the House and in the Senate for a bill that's been vetoed to become a law. Whereas obviously if it's a bill that the governor is going to sign, it just takes a simple majority. So that is sort of where we are in the legislative session. I'll talk about a couple key issues, and then I want to be quick because we have a special guest today, so we have an additional presenter. On taxes, a couple bullets. We saw the return of the flat tax is now back, so we passed the bill. I didn't support it. There's different versions. There's a House version and a Senate version that would take us down into a single rate income tax. I think that's a very dangerous thing. I also think it is misguided in the sense of what the majority of my constituents have expressed is that they really want property tax relief.
Yeah.
I've just heard little to nothing at all when I was out knocking thousands of doors this campaign season about income taxes. I heard a ton about property taxes. So I feel like we're not really being responsive to what it is that our constituents have shared with us or is their top priority in terms of taxes. I'll give you a piece of good news. I had a property tax bill that passed the Senate this week 40-0, got unanimous support. And what that bill does is we currently in law have a property tax rebate program for seniors and for disabled veterans. Not enough people know about it, so not enough people are taking advantage of it, but what current law says is if you're a senior or a disabled veteran and you're 65 or older and your home is valued at $350,000 or less and your adjusted gross income is $50,000 or less, the state will essentially reimburse you for any increase in property taxes. The challenge with that is just that many people are not meeting one or both of those thresholds in our community. So I've been working to raise it. My original bill would have raised the assessed value threshold to $595,000 to bring more people into the programs. Part of a compromise that became $450,000. So it is still a $100,000 increase from $350,000 to $450,000. So it's going to bring more people into the program from that perspective. And with respect to the adjusted gross income threshold, it raises that from $50,000 up to $80,000. And it eliminates from that calculation Social Security. So it has to be truly earned income to count towards that $80,000. So it is not perfect. I would have liked it to be much more expansive, but that was essentially the highest number I could get my colleagues to agree to. And it will bring thousands more people in Johnson County into the program. So I was really proud that that passed the Senate unanimously. We have sort of dueling constitutional amendments that deal with property tax. We'll see how those are resolved in conference committee. I don't want to get too much into those details because I will keep you in suspense. We'll see what happens this week, and I will give you the details at our April town hall of what we end up doing with respect to those. On education, we are really going backwards in terms of funding special education. The budget that was passed does not include any increases at all for special education. Because of that, we're actually going backwards because obviously there's inflation, the cost of everything is going up. And so really by keeping funding constant, in real dollar terms, it's really a cut, is what it is. So that was really disappointing. Also in terms, so that's kind of the highlight of or low light of the education debate. I'll talk about the budget. The Senate looked at the budget this week on Tuesday. I did not vote for the budget. I've always stood up here and said that one of the hardest votes that I have every year is voting on the budget, because with any $10 billion budget, there are a lot of things in there that you like. There are a lot of things in there that you don't like, and all you get to do is make an up or down vote. But this year's budget, I think, was probably the worst budget that I've seen in my 5 years up there. So it was a relatively easy decision for me to not vote for it. As I mentioned, it does not include any additional funding for special education. We got a letter this week from our superintendents from Olathe, Blue Valley, and Shawnee Mission that said that, for example, Shawnee Mission has spent $60 million over the last 3 school years, taking money out of their general fund to make up for the shortfall in special education because they're not being reimbursed at the 92% that our state statute requires it to be. So that's $60 million in general education funds that haven't been able to benefit all students. There's no Medicaid expansion in the budget. There is a 3% across the board cut to all of the agency's operating budgets. State employees only got a 1 to 2.5% pay raise. So again, with them, we're not even keeping up with inflation. That's, in terms of real dollars, that's actually a cut to our state employee pay raises. And there's just a bunch of strange provisions that were put in the budget that I thought were inappropriate. There's $4 million that has been cut until the state certifies that they're not doing any DEI programs. Which, again, I mean, largely they're not happening, but nobody really knows what DEI is. Nobody's really been able to define it. So how you would be able to certify that you've met this sort of nebulous thing that we're putting into statute. I mean, one of them is that you can't have your pronouns in your email signature So I don't know if we're going to check every state employee's email signature, but it just did seem to make sense. They also prohibited state employees from working from home, which I think that really those are decisions that should be left to their respective managers, right? I mean that is really not a decision for a state legislature to go into every single government office and dictate what the work arrangements should be. There are probably a lot of positions where folks do need to be in the office and where that's entirely appropriate, and I support that. If that's what the manager feels like that they need to have a successful office, I think that's appropriate. But again, that's for the manager to make. If a manager is comfortable with various arrangements with employees and they feel like those employees are still meeting expectations and being productive, I again think those are decisions that really need to be left at the managerial level, not at the state legislative level. So I want to move on to our next presenter. And again, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So we'll do our special guest because I know he's got time constraints. This was kind of by popular demand, but I wanted to bring up our new Johnson County Sheriff. Folks had asked to hear from him, and so he's just going to do again a very kind of short overview. But Sheriff Roberson was sworn into office in January. Prior to that, I got to know him when he was chief of the Prairie Village Police Department. We worked together really closely. His reputation in our community is outstanding, and so I was really thrilled to see him. I was really thrilled to see him elected as sheriff because he brings to us over 30 years of law and military experience to the office. He did a tremendous job in Prairie Village and is off to a great start as our Johnson County Sheriff. So folks had asked to hear from him. So Sheriff, you want to give us a brief update on what you've been doing?
I'm going to start because these nice young ladies come up here and get these chairs. They're just being nice. Come on up here and get these chairs. There's a couple, 2 or 3 up here. I said I was going to put you on the spot. Okay. Ethan, thank you very much. I am so happy to be here. And I'm so happy I checked my emails on Friday and told him I really, honestly, I don't get a chance to check my personal emails very often. And I should do that. But if anybody else in here needs me, please contact me at my work email, byron.roberson@jocogov.org, because I just don't check that email very often because I am constantly checking my emails at work, and most of the emails on my Gmail are spam. So just send them to my JocoGov. It has been an awesome ride. I'm about to start my 3rd month already. Doesn't seem like that, but it is. I'm getting ready to start my third month. And I'm telling you, are there any Prairie Village residents in here? Oh, dang, I was going to tell you that this has been the most fun I've had. But I still love PV. I didn't think it was possible to have a better time as a law enforcement leader. But I am telling you, this has been the most fun. I knew that it was going to be some fun involved. I knew it was going to be some challenges. But I have been delightfully surprised at the level of participation, the level of loyalty to that organization, the level of their dedication to the job. I had a town hall kind of my own yesterday because I've been communicating with them, and that's been the main problem with that organization. Very lack of communication throughout and outside. So yesterday, I had connections with the college, JUCO, And I said, I need a big room. I need a big room to get as many of these employees in one place at the same time so I can give them my message, my vision, and our vision as an organization. So they gave me, I was able to get a nice big conference center room. I had 300 of the employees of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office and another 150 online because we streamed it. And so I was able to get the message out. And I am telling you, they have been dying to get this opportunity to express themselves. They have been dying to get this opportunity to have someone they can be proud of in leadership. And that has been the most rewarding thing, because there are a lot of great people that work for that organization. Unfortunately, with any organization, including our own government, we are judged by the ones who lead us. That is why the vote is so important, because no one will really know about a lot of the organization if the one at the top is so messy. And that's what happened to the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. It was so messy at the top, so poor leadership. That is how they've been judged for a long time. But I'm telling you, it has been a great ride so far. Things we've been doing so far, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I know you got all these great people up here that are dedicated. I'm so glad to have worked with all of them last year. I will continue to work with them now. One thing that I did work with some of the reps on is a Senate Bill 178. There's a lot of talk about this, kind of underground, about Senate Bill 178. It's a dead bill right now. But what the bill was going to mandate that local law enforcement participate in ICE initiatives. And I, as president, I just happened to be president, not because I was sheriff. It was my turn to be president of the Johnson County Chiefs and Sheriffs Association. So that's 17 different jurisdictions in Johnson County. We have an association. There's also associations in other parts of the state. There's a state sheriff's association. There's a Kansas Police Officers and Chiefs Association, things like that. All of us were on the same page. We all opposed this bill. I sent written testimony to Topeka. We engaged. We used our reps. We used our persons that were lobbying for us. And we were able to get them off of this. So they did not continue with this. They didn't continue to try to get this passed. We tried to sit down with Cobot. That did very little because he wants this bill. There are certain people that want this bill. And you may notice that the KBI are the only ones that engaged in this bill. Because they are, for whatever reason, I don't know, just follow the breadcrumbs and you'll find that out. On the other side of the state line, the same type of bill was going on, and only one agency chose to do it, and that's the Missouri Highway Patrol. Follow that, and you'll figure that out also. So otherwise, we have been very busy. I've been very busy trying to find out if we could save some money in a lot of processes. So what's important to you is that we are saving some money. I'm not getting rid of anyone, but I'm flattening out our leadership so that we are more efficient, so that we are able to not have to come back in December and ask for $5 million. We are using the resources that we have. We are putting resources in the 435 loop where most of our crime is occurring. So you will see the Johnson County Sheriff's Office more so in the 435 loop than you ever have. So don't be alarmed, there's not anything going on, but we are working with every police department to ask them what they need. And this is what we've been doing this entire time. We've gone to each police department in Johnson County, sat down with the chief of police, asked them what they need, and we're addressing those needs. So these are some of the things that we're doing. Please stay tuned, follow us on our Facebook, follow us on our website. And I say that because I need your help. Because we post things on there, and you have those groups on there, and there's some groups popping up all the time that love to put negative things on there. So the more positive things we have on there, the better. Someone suggested, well, maybe you shouldn't put your face on Facebook so much. That's not me. I am going to, they're not going to stop me from posting about great things that we're doing in this county because a couple of negative people who have no scruples get on there and make comments. But I need you good people to get on there and make good positive comments to drown out some of that nonsense. So thank you very much, Ethan, for inviting me, and I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate it. Usually a closer. They're making you go first. You're usually closer.
Good morning. We hated to lose this guy in Prairie Village, believe you me. So I'm Jarrod Ousley. I represent the 21st District, the Kansas House, and my district runs from state line to a little past Metcalf and 67th Street to 83rd. So I'm just wondering, is anybody here going to attend the Satanic Black Mass on Friday? If you are in the wrong room. So, yeah, I think we've had as much discussion about that as we've had on taxes and education over the last couple of weeks. But hopefully we're going to be out of there on Friday. I don't know yet. But anyway, I serve on 3 committees. I serve on the Water Committee, the Tax Committee, and the Education Committee, and I'm ranking Democrat on the House Education Committee, so I'll be in 3 different conference committees this week when we talk about education. And I would like to tell you about a whole bunch of bills and so on that we have had in education this year, but I think that's going to be more appropriate next month when we finalize everything. I thought what I'd do maybe is just give you a little overview. First of all, I just talked about water. We've done a terrific job in water over the I've been on water committee now for 5 years. And we have really changed the state policies on water conservation. Okay, there we go. Oh, yeah. Oh, I can hear myself now, that's good. Yeah, anyway, water committee's done a wonderful job. And we have really worked on conservation and how we're going to save the aquifer. Actually, it's going to take decades to save the aquifer out there in western Kansas, but at least we've got people understanding that water is perhaps the #1 important issue for the state of Kansas. Tax committee, I'll let Rui and Stephanie and I all serve on the tax committee, and I'll let them run over some things on the tax committee. I wanted to kind of focus on education this morning. And again, it's not necessarily on specific bills, but kind of the atmosphere that we've had to deal with in education this year. It's kind of Trump light, and they're coming after education in Kansas just like they're coming after education at the national level. And what Trump is doing at the national level is going to have a major impact on Kansas and our educational systems, everything from preschool to graduate school. So I noticed that this week he's coming up with the American Academy. He wants one big university. Sounds like Trump University to me, but that was so successful. And his efforts to destroy the Department of Education, which he's doing piece by piece. He can't get rid of the department per se, but he can fire enough people to make it totally irrelevant. And the Department of Education performs some very important duties on behalf of our colleges and universities and our public education systems across the country, especially as far as distributing money for grants and other programs and so on. So to get rid of that and turn all of that over to 50 states, that would just be chaos in my opinion. We had very interesting roundtable discussion a couple of weeks ago. We had teachers in, we had superintendents in, we had board members in, we had members from KNEA, we had members from Kansas Association of School Boards, and I suggested that we have that to talk about issues that we could all agree on. And I've also suggested to the chair of the committee that during the interim session between now and next year, we get a committee, we get a small group of people from the House Education Committee and the House Education Committee to meet with the Board of Regents and the State Board of Education and some of our local school boards, because they're trying to, the Republicans are trying to go after all of these, and a lot of the bills that we're seeing coming through House Ed anyway are geared at taking away, just chipping away at the rights and responsibilities of the State Board of Education. And I totally object to that. I keep reminding people up there at the well, when we're talking about education, we're elected by you all to do a certain job. And then you go down the list and you're down the ballot and you elect the people who go on the state school board, and they're to do a certain job. And then you go down the list a little bit further and you elect the same people, you elect people who serve on our local school boards, and they have a specific job to use. The legislature, the leadership in the legislature would like to take over all of that. We even had the majority leader in a leaked Zoom meeting earlier this year saying he'd like to dissolve local school boards. That's just insanity. So anyway, I'm hoping that the chair, at least of the House Education Committee, seems very willing to look at something like that. We don't agree a lot on policy issues, but she's been very good to work with as far as process goes in the committee. And we had, she gives people, when we have a number of conferees, she gives them 2 minutes. Everybody gets 2 minutes to present their case and so on. And I really appreciated it. We had a bill up that would have given the Attorney General of Kansas more power to investigate, arrest people for different things within the educational system. And he can, when she started calling on the conferees, he was the first person to testify. And Susan has this little timer, and she punched in 2 minutes, and Kobach got up there and started, and of course he was probably going to go for 20 minutes, and I was looking over and went, 58, 59, 60, and Susan said, that's your 2 minutes, Attorney General Kobach. We're going to move on to the next conferee. And Chris Kobach was not used to being talked to in that direction. And I thought, good, I leaned over and I said, good for you, Susan, you know. And anyway, hopefully that will give us an opportunity between sessions to try to hash out some things that we can all agree on, and how we can use legislation to help the State Board of Education and the Board of Regents, which I think is extremely important. And again, next month, I hope to be able to talk about some specific legislation that we've come up with. But right now, I'm just kind of in flux with this being conference committee week and everything. But again, water, exceptional progress in that area. So I know we've got a bunch of other people here, so I will let them go ahead, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Representative Stockstill. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Melanie Haas. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education. We always kind of jockey to figure out who's going to go next over here in the corner. And I was like, I think I can follow that on the ed piece. So I'll try to kind of pick up where he left off. First of all, if you haven't noticed, it is spring break. And so I hope that some of you have gotten some extra time with those kiddos in your lives. And if you're tired of them, they go back to school on Monday. And hopefully it won't snow, because that's what usually happens when they get a week off. So I spent my spring break in Washington, D.C. with my family, actually. We've got a family there that we went to visit. We wanted to see Annapolis, and we did a college visit with my senior. So that was interesting. It was also really interesting to drive through downtown D.C. I only saw one protest. There was also a walk going on. There were lots of streets that were closed, but something else that I noticed was as we drove past a lot of the office buildings, I saw boxes and boxes and boxes sitting on desks, and empty offices. And I don't know which buildings I was looking at. Maybe that building was empty, but I saw it in more than one place. It was the tone, everything about DC right now is weird. And the folks that we were staying with are federal employees. They went to a fundraiser on Sunday night, came home with a sign to put in their yard that said support federal employees, or federal workers, I guess is what the sign said. And it's a very different time right now in DC. I'm glad that we got to spend that time. Still had a great trip. We went to the Holocaust Museum, and I will just say that if you happen to be planning a trip there in the near future, you will note that it is a different experience right now because as you walk through, for me, as I walked through the exhibits, I saw an awful lot of right now in what happened then.
Thank you.
Everybody wants to know what's happening with the closure of the Department of Ed. And I got a lot of phone calls from reporters this week. There's no inside baseball. I have no new information. Unfortunately, I don't even get emails. You know, it occurred to me, there is one email that I get from the Department of Ed. It comes every couple of weeks, and I haven't had that email since the beginning of March, which is a little bit longer than I would normally wait for it. And so I reached out to the gentleman that it comes from on LinkedIn. I haven't heard back yet, but we don't know who's still there and who's not. The Department of Education at the federal level had over 4,000 employees before they started making these cuts. And they were cut to around 2,000, last I heard. And then, reading probably the same news you read, that they will be cut to practically nothing, keeping staff only for issuing some checks. And in fact, at the state level here in Kansas, we know that some of the folks that were issuing checks to our state, their entire department was cut. And that's how they're doing it. They're cutting entire departments within the department. So it's not a performance issue. They're not going through employee by employee and saying, you know, we can trim this team. They're cutting entire departments is what we're hearing. And so there are checks that won't come or will be severely delayed. And those, of course, go directly to our schools and support our districts. And so districts are now going to have to scramble to figure out how to kind of fill those funds while they're waiting for those checks to come and just not knowing what's going to happen next. I'll tell you real quick about the March State Board of Ed meeting. So we had a snow day in February. We got to make it up in March, which was kind of fun. I think that the superintendents appreciated that we too have to make up snow days. And so on Monday this month, we had a board retreat that was actually really wonderful. We have 3 new board members on the state board since January, and those retreats are important. We tried to have one previously and not everybody showed up. This time we had much better attendance, and I was surprised even by some of the board members that I thought I knew, and that I frankly had my own biases about. I learned some interesting things in places where we agreed, and so I always love those retreats and just any opportunity to have those hard conversations, because you never know where maybe you can meet somebody on a position, you know, that you thought that they were on the other side. So that was great. We spent one day in March at the State School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind, which we serve as the local board for. So that gave us just one day in the boardroom. The board retreat was held on Monday, so we had a full day in the boardroom on Tuesday. And I will say that our agendas are looking a lot slimmer. So you've heard from me a lot about how the members on the board will pull things off of the consent agenda. And with our new leadership, so we have a new chair and vice chair as of January, and the new leadership is taking a lot of things off of consent and putting them on our regular agenda, which means we're having really deep dives on things that usually have money associated with them that, frankly, they're not big ticket items, but board members want to vote against bringing in federal dollars or dollars that go to programs that may look and feel a little bit like DEI, or, you know, whatever the thing is that they're opposed to right now. They want to hear more about that item. And so those are getting pulled off. We're getting full presentations. It's kind of neat because we get to hear about those programs, and I think it's important that people learn about them. However, it is slowing down the work that we're doing. So normally, the board would be setting goals in January. We'd start talking about what do we want to work on in our schools? Where is the room for improvement? What can we do at the state level to raise the bar? And that's a conversation that's really not happening right now. So things that we've done in the past, and I say we, I'll say boards, even before I was on the board, have done individual plans of study is a requirement now at the state level that came from one of those conversations amongst board members. Lasted a long time. They had to hash out what does it look like for each student to have this plan and how are we going to require it. So that's one example of something that the state board said we want to work on this, and they made it happen. In my time on the board, we got to tackle graduation requirements. That took 1.5 years. And so if you want to make big change, you've got to set big goals, you've got to do the work, and you've got to figure out how you're really going to affect it. It's not enough to say we want to raise test scores or we want to improve reading. We've got a plan for how we're going to improve reading, right? That's a big plan. There's a lot of money associated with it. There's a lot of training. There are benchmarks. So we are now not getting to do that work. I hope that tide is going to change, but that is a trend that I'm seeing right now. And so we're just doing less, less goal-driven work. Additionally, this time of year, January to May-ish, I spend a lot of time watching the legislature on YouTube because I'm just trying to keep up, kind of like you, I'm trying to keep up with what they're doing. And what that looks like for me is sitting at home and kind of running a couple of different screens on my computer and just trying to keep track. And every once in a while I'll hear education and I'll go, what? That bill didn't have education in it. And so a great example of this was yesterday. I'm watching the Senate proceeding, Thursday, I'm watching the Senate proceedings, and all of a sudden they're talking about sex ed. And I'm like, wait a minute, we have standards for that? That is something that sits with the local districts. They get to decide what kind of curriculum they want to use. My board is responsible for setting the standards, and here is a senator saying, we want to require that every student in Kansas watches a high quality video of an ultrasound. And he suggested that it should come from YouTube. Just go out to YouTube and Google it, he said. And I'm sitting at my kitchen computer going, what is happening? And so as I unpacked this bill, and as I was writing it down for you guys, I wrote down the number, it's Senate sub for HB 2382. I was like, what is 2382? Because I can't remember. Is Jerry laughing yet? I go and look up 2382. It's the bill that was going to give the state board a raise. So then I looked up my salary for the last time that it's recorded. 2023, I made $5,900 as a state board member. I go to a meeting every single month. I put in hours and hours and hours of my time to the extent that it is hard to hold down a full-time job. And they gut and go the bill that was going to double my pay, to a whole lot, so that they could put that in it. That was fun. So I do hear, Jarrod talked a little bit about there is, I'm hearing rumblings that there is still going to be an effort to get rid of the State Board of Education. I assume that's a next year thing, but I just want to tack that on as we're continuing to talk about what the legislature is doing in Topeka. I think it's really important that we keep our eyes on the fact that we are still a local control state when it comes to schools. The worries about what's going on at the federal level, it's propaganda, frankly. When Trump says we're returning education to the states, it's already with the states. That's why I have my job. That's why you all elected me to go to Topeka and do this work. So I don't buy for an instant that anything is being returned to the states because we're already doing all of that here. Again, the things that I rely on the U.S. Department of Education for are just being the experts. They are the legal experts on many of the federal laws that we are required to meet. So they have lawyers. They are great resources for us. That's what I see going away there. So I will be happy to take your questions later. Thank you.
So lucky to have her fighting for us at the state. First of all, I can't tell you, my name is Becky Fast. I'm your Johnson County Commissioner. I represent most of the inside of the 435 Beltway. But I wanted to highlight how nice it is to have Sheriff Roberson. Those of us on the commission are just skipping in joy to have him there. And his innovation in his eye so far. During COVID, I had someone lived in Pennsylvania who somehow was mesmerized by me, drove from Pennsylvania, just walked into our meeting room and cornered me, so was stalking me. So I was just really joyful. Within the first weeks, the sheriff emails us and says, I think we need to look at security. That wasn't even something, he didn't even know my story till now about security, and that sort of in-tune detail the sheriff has of what improvements need to happen, are going to happen at public safety in the community for the commission all through his staff. So thank you. So we don't have a lot of time, but I want to highlight the entire county commission was just in Washington. We've never had all 7 members go to Washington because of our concerns of what's happening there. We met with Senator Moran, Senator Marshall, Rep. Davids, Rep. Cleaver, Rep. Alwards, who's on the Missouri side, Mann, Estes. So we did a full court press on all of them, talking about we still don't know what's happening with a lot of the federal funds. We haven't gotten our FEMA funds. A lot of our cities are still worried about their federal infrastructure. We have Mayor Mission here. I brought up the mission with our senators. Medicaid cuts would really destroy our community mental health center, our developmental disability services, as well as Children's Mercy. The joy I had was sitting in the senator's office and the phone rang every minute. So keep it up. And I was a congressional aide for 12 years, and when congressional aides feel the pressure, the member feels the pressure.
Yay.
And those aides felt the pressure. They're not used to having that phone ring every minute saying, stop attacking our democracy, our federal institutions. So we are starting our budget planning, and it is probably when I worked for a congressman 12 years, I was on the Roland Park City Council 2 terms, I have a master's in public administration, I'm now in my 60s. I have never been so worried about the state of government, in the local level too. I mean, we just did a great public transit plan. We've been working on it for 2 years, but half of our public transit funds are from the federal government. The CR that just got approved to September, that has public transit cuts in it. And the budget they're proposing for next year has public transit cuts. If you are ever on Row, I often see somebody get off and go to Walmart. If you're on Johnson Drive, I often see someone get off in that transit center and walk to one of the businesses. So it is used in especially in Northeast Johnson County. So for our budget planning, what do? How do we plan for public transit? How do we plan for our housing? We have many vulnerable families that rely on public housing. After Rep. David's meeting, I walked 1.5 miles to join the HUD employees, and I stood with them and I yelled with them, and I felt so good. And it just broke my heart to hear the stories that they have worked their whole life in HUD and were just locked out. And Rep. Cleaver joined and did a press conference with him. And so those are really valuable programs that impact Johnson County. So we are now looking at what do these 3% cuts that the state is going through and how that will impact us. Johnson County relies for our community corrections, our senior services, our mental health services. We put together packages, from federal funds, from grants, from state funds, and 3% doesn't sound a lot, but we don't know. Are they going to cut, our juvenile justice programs that keep these individuals out of jail? And that means higher costs for our sheriff if we don't have these mental health programs in our jail, in our community, if we don't have these reentry programs, which have come worlds. This in my 7 years on the commission, we have really emphasized how to help people so they don't go to jail, and if of low-level crimes, or to support them so they don't linger in jail if they have a mental health issue. That was one of my main concerns when I started on the commission, that 40% of the individuals in our jail had mental health issues, and many could be supported in our community. But when these community supports that prevent incarceration are cut at the state or federal level, that we are going to see increased costs there. So with that, I ask you just to keep calling, being a congressional aide. You don't need to say a lot. Just say protect Medicaid. Keep your hands off the federal government and on the Department of Education. It can be a short email, it can be a short call. Working for Congressman Moore, what we do is we categorize every day. How many people called to protect Medicaid, and we gave it to the congressman. A lot of congressional offices do that. They categorize their calls, their emails, and it is wonderful when you can say for the day, 1,000 people said protect Medicaid today, and most offices do that. So don't feel like you need to give a lot when you call or email. And you can also just leave a message on their voicemail. I love doing that before I have my coffee in the morning. I just say, hello, Senator Moran, it's Becky again, your local county commissioner. And I hope you have a nice day, but please don't cut Medicaid. So I will leave that. We have several more state reps. So here.
Good morning. So the senator was talking about the process in conference committees, and most of my committee work has been done now. I am on appropriations, so I did have an opportunity to chime in on the budget in multiple spots, not only on my building instruction committee for everybody's capital improvement plans, but then the K-12 budget, half the state's budget, and then on appropriations. So a lot of that work's been wrapped up now for quite some time. I was not happy with what the House appropriations did with the K-12 budget, and then the more I learned about what the Senate did to it is, why did we even bother with all those hearings and all that input? So I'm hoping we get a little bit of that back. As the ranking member on child welfare, I will be conferencing with Senate Public Health and something else. Our committees don't align, House and Senate. So oftentimes, sometimes child welfare will conference with Senate Judiciary. And I learned recently that we will be conferencing with child welfare with Senator Gossage as the Senate chair, but then I also learned as my ranking position on House welfare reform, if we go to conference on that, I'm going to be sitting at a conference table with Renee Erickson and Mike Thompson. So think of it. Conference committee is also one thing the senator didn't mention, and it might not be that relevant today because you got to keep in mind that we're a self-policing body, the legislature is. And one of our rules is also, not only can you not bundle more than 5 bills, but that gets really tricky when you've already bundled 5 bills in this bill and then 5 bills in that bill, and then you start boxing all these bills together. It becomes a massive piece of legislation. But then also a piece of conferenceable material is supposed to have passed one chamber or another. So if it's only had a House hearing but not passed the House as a whole, it's not conferenceable. But we have bent that rule in the past and in the more recent past. And that's really frustrating because it's been challenged and it's been overruled. And it depends upon who's bringing it, who wants it, and who challenges it. But I could have a whole other debate upon that. But I will say that in 2014, in the middle of the night, in a conference committee report, we saw the tax credit scholarship for low-income students come into law. And ever since then, they have tried to expand that eligibility in one manner or another. It has a $10 million price tag. And this year, knowing what they've done with special education funding, not only on the House side, but on the Senate side, recall the House had $10 million additional funding in our budget. And that $10 million kept us from slipping backwards. It kept up with inflation. So we're supposed to fund it to 92% of excess cost, and we were currently at 76%, I think, and that $10 million would have kept us at 76% next year. So it would have given the districts a little bit of budgetary, forecast, and with it reduced to nothing out of the Senate, we are now slipping backwards. However, Senate Bill 87 was up for debate not only Wednesday, but Thursday again. They skipped over it Wednesday, and then they ended up skipping over it again. And that would have expanded the eligibility for that tax credit scholarship and expanding the funding available by $10 million. And I thought, that's not right. If we can't put money into special education, why are we funding the secondary education program? And I had worked with research over the years, and I promised you all an update upon non-public accredited schools. Well, I did get that update, and I got it in the form of a state map. And the state map had dots, where all of our accredited non-public schools are. Well, we had that map printed, and we had put that map on every House member's desk. And I received quite a few questions about this, because when you look at that visual and you see actually where your money's going versus your district and your constituency, it makes it hard. And they skipped over Senate Bill 87 again. So it did pass the Senate. It is conferenceable. We'll see where it comes back. One bonus this year as far as dealing with a process like that is there's no education bill. Our base education funding is in our budget this year. It's not in a separate bill as it has been in prior years. So the budget bill is line item veto-able, and the governor can just strike that line item if it would make its way in there. But I wanted to end on a positive note. Last week, We had a hearing on House Bill 2379, and if this isn't your first Saturday morning spent with us, you know that for years I've been working on a bill to allow an individual to put themselves on a no purchase list for firearms in an effort to prevent suicide. We finally had that hearing. It was 6 years in the making, and it went wonderful. People poured their heart out, you know, pleading for this bill to pass. And there was still some speculation with the members, so we're gonna keep the bill alive. It'll stay in Fed and State, and that's an exempt committee. But instead of trying to rush the process and rushing it through the House, knowing the session is accelerated, we're gonna go ahead and keep working on it and make sure, you know, all of our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and we'll pick it back up next year. And I think with that, I can turn it over to the next representative, Stephanie Clayton. 2379.
Thank you, Representative. And it was an excellent hearing. I'm a member of the Federal and State Affairs Committee, and the hearing on this bill that, Jarrod, how many years? 6. So, you know, I mean, and a lot of times, especially when you are, you know, in the minority, it takes about 6 or 7 years to get legislation passed. My mom always equated it with planting lilacs. If you buy a new lilac bush, it takes about 7 years to get blooms, and so that's very apropos for summer. So another good thing happened in the Federal and State Affairs Committee. So many of you, I know you are because I've gotten all of your emails. I've gotten all of the emails these past 2 weeks. But with the land conveyance for the Shawnee Indian Mission, that bill ended up getting defeated in committee. And it was defeated largely due to the immense activism of people from Northeast Johnson County. Now, during the bill discussion, when we were discussing the bill, there was a little bit of snark kind of thrown, you know, saying that calling the emails or constant contact nasty grams or referring to the people that sent it as extra. But I looked at the people in the committee and I said, all right, this is Northeast Johnson County. These are my people. And I said, now do you understand why I am the way that I am? And actually, so it was funny because a lot of the representatives from the more rural areas or from Olathe, they're like, no, like we totally get it. And I said, yes, I'm proud to represent some of, you know, the highest voter turnout, although that's technically Ree's district. We always have a contest, and he won. But highest voter turnout, high educated, and excellent advocates. I know that whenever someone has an issue with the bill, they always know that they can email or text or call us. We're very accessible and very open and very proud of that. So, all right, so that's what happened in Federal and State Affairs. Representative Stogsdill and Representative Xu and I are on House Tax, and we are very grateful in advance to Senator Corson because he is going to be going to the mat for the more reasonable tax policies. So Senator Corson already mentioned that we had sort of a flat tax, a Brownback 2.0, that passed out of both committees. I believe it passed off of your Senate floor. On the House floor, we were able to put in a couple of amendments that made it slightly less bad, but I have major concerns when we're going into conference what is going to happen, because honestly, that tax bill is so bad because it ends up giving income tax cuts, which is literally the last tax cut that all of you all have been asking us for. I think what I have noticed, especially during this last campaign, from answering my emails, what I tend to hear the most about from all of you are concerns about what is happening at the national level. RIP my portfolio, way to go, Trump. But also, you know, we're seeing higher food costs, and we have managed to, of course, you know, cut the state tax on food. But what we are hearing is overall, and whether this is actually, you know, I'm kind of curious, and I want to see kind of by a show of hands, because I'm wondering if the property tax issue is just something that more conservative folks who want to slash and burn taxes have been sort of, you know, riling people up about, or have you all been suffering from higher property taxes? I mean, raise your hand. How are you feeling about property taxes? Are you getting hit, or are you okay? Raise your hand if you feel like you're getting hit. Okay, so, you know, I'm a a single parent, and I will be taking an additional job primarily in order to pay my higher property taxes, which I'm happy to do because I love my neighborhood and I love my community, and I'm proud to pay taxes. But I think a lot of us are not necessarily like, we're kind of better than the rest of the state. We're a little bit better sports when it comes to supporting our local amenities. So this is what is going on with property tax, and this is what Senator Corson is going to have to hold the line on, and this is why, give him a hug when you're leaving. He's going to have a heck of a week, but I count on him. So we have one property tax plan that has passed the House that, it has a couple of things in it that are kind of tricky. There's a protest petition that is, that makes it a little bit tougher for people, for that line to be held. But it also puts in place sort of if any of you know what the local ad valorem tax fund is, that hadn't been funded for years. Now there's something similar in it called the Astra Fund that does put some more money from the state, giving it back to local governments. And then, so that's the House plan, and so it has some things that, aren't perfect in it. Then there's the Senate plan, which is capping all valuations. I believe, what percentage is it? At 3%. And so on the surface, that looks pretty good because yikes, our valuations have been leaping quite a bit. But when you put those price controls on the free market, what ends up happening is a very adverse effect on revenues to our local governments, and we will see a drop in our services because of that, and it will also have a very chilling effect on any young families purchasing houses. If you just look at some of the things that have been happening in California, that's disastrous. So one of the problems here is that, like it or not, we have been dealing with a very unpleasant national onslaught of all kinds of terrible legislation. And so we have been holding the line and making difficult decisions while looking at this and understanding that it is very much part of a big picture, because it always goes back to our constituents and your ability to hopefully not only survive economically, but to thrive economically. But we also have to make sure that we're fighting off some of the more ultra-conservative slash and burn aspects when it comes to tax and budget. So it is not an easy position, but we have been managing to do the best that we can with the resources that we have at hand. And to that, I want to talk about one thing that you are going to hear me talking a lot about between now and 2026, and that is the fact that the direct election for judges, so basically politicizing our courts and putting our courts up for sale, passed in the House by one vote on Wednesday. Vote no on August 4th, 2026. Okay. That is one thing, so keep that date in your mind and understand that we are seeing a lot of money, national money, going into judicial elections, particularly in Wisconsin. It's ridiculous. I think it's around like 50 million. I think we will see, unfortunately, in August of 2026 and prior to that, tens of millions of dollars from other parts of the country that don't know anything about us or our values, trying to sway us and change our minds to put our judiciary that should be impartial essentially up for sale on the market. Our courts are not for sale. Vote no on August 4th. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thanks everyone. Rui Xu, House District 25. I can't understate how important this judicial selection vote is. If you thought the abortion August 2nd vote was important, this one is more important because that was a response to a Supreme Court decision, and because they don't like that, they're trying to undo our Supreme Court. So it is vitally important that we vote no. For me, I've been sitting for an hour, so I'm going to make this quick. I'm just going to touch on a couple of higher level things that the others somehow haven't touched on. The first one is that there was a bill that passed the Kansas House that changed our budget process a little bit. So we are constitutionally required to come together with the governor and pass out a budget at the end of the year. There was a bill that came through that essentially creates a continuing resolution if that doesn't happen. So if the governor just vetoes a budget because it's so bad, and the one this year is, that means we automatically revert to last year's budget. This is bad because, one, we're not doing our jobs, and two, it just kind of forces the hand and we're not allowed to make adjustments. we got a raise last year in the legislature, which I was proud to support. But if we're not doing the one job that we're required to do, I think it is absurd to ask people for us to have a raise. And so that bill is really bad. The vote count through the House was close to being able to be vetoed and sustained, but we'll see as that comes along. The second thing is housing. So we've talked about housing a lot as a crisis in the state. That's the primary reason that property taxes keep going up, is because not enough housing supply and high housing demand, especially in Johnson County, kind of creates higher and higher valuations, right? The only thing we've done in housing this year in the Kansas legislature really is cut a housing program. That's it. We have not expanded housing, we have not loosened regulations on housing. All we've done on the House side is eliminate the program, and I don't know if the Senate's worked it, but I think they were working on just lowering a cap on a program that was kind of expensive. So I'm going to make a request to the Speaker to have an interim committee specifically on housing supply, rather than looking at ways to kind of cut housing affordability, because I think other than the Supreme Court and other than water, I think housing supply is one of the biggest issues that we have to address. And then the last thing that I'll touch on is childcare, and this is also one of the kind of the big crises that we have in our state. This was not a unanimous vote amongst the legislatures here, and for good reason. So for a couple of years now, the governor has been wanting to consolidate the state programs. Right now, childcare is housed in like 10 different agencies, and it's just a really complicated system. And part of the reason we don't have enough childcare slots is kind of due to this kind of government inefficiency. So she's wanted to create a singular Office of Early Childhood Education, and that's a really good idea, and it would really just create a single place where people know to get childcare services. Good. Unfortunately, because of the supermajority legislature, it is a highly compromised bill, and so there are stuff in there that not all of us like. I don't think none of us like, but we kind of came down on different ways. So part of it is actually loosening childcare regulations a little bit. Some of it is reasonable loosening. So some of it is like, you can, like, there's less space required per child. Not ideal, but kind of workable in most cases. The most contentious part of this bill was that it kind of essentially said if you are a home child care provider and you provide less than 35 hours of care for 4 kids or less, which is quite a bit, then you can be entirely unlicensed. And that's dangerous, that's iffy. I talked to a lot of child care providers about this. I sit on the Commerce Committee that passed this out, and they said that for better or for worse, there is also quite a bit of unlicensed childcare out there, and so this bill doesn't drastically make it worse. There are loopholes in the old regulations that we are now writing into statute. So it makes it a little worse, but they're said not that much worse. And so I came down on the side of voting yes to it because I do think the efficiencies and the childcare slots created by the Office of Early Childhood was a net positive over everything else. But some of us voted no, and I think that's a totally justified no vote as well. So just wanted to touch on that as well. You guys have been listening to us for almost an hour and a half, so I think it's time for questions. So let's bring you guys into this.
All right, so I want to introduce everybody. So Hudson Boyle, who's got the microphone with me, is a student and a constituent in our district, and he's been interning. He's been interning in our office, primarily doing a lot of research and writing projects. He's a really gifted writer and has been just a huge asset to what we're doing in our Senate office. And so Hudson is going to work the mic today. So with that, let's open it up for any questions.
Does the judicial election bill allow for partisan elections?
Yes, yeah, it allows folks to run as a member of a political party. It also allows folks to hold office as a political party. So you could be the treasurer of the Kansas Republican Party and the Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court. I mean, it is really problematic.
just to put a little bit of nuance, technically the constitutional amendment doesn't say that, it just says we're going to elect them, but it would require a trailer bill from the legislature to kind of outline what that means, and knowing the makeup, it will almost certainly be partisan elections, but the language that you're going to see on the constitutional amendment will not say that, but functionally that's what it means. Kind of like how the last abortion vote didn't say they were going to ban abortion, but they were going to ban abortion.
All right, hi everybody. So I'm the mayor in Mission. Thank you all for coming to Mission this morning. I'm Sally Flora, and I'm going to follow Representative Clayton's lead and ask you a couple questions in order to give Ethan some ammunition as he goes into Senate tax this week. So raise your hand if you're generally happy with the services of your city government. Raise your hand if you think city councils are the experts in city issues. Raise your hand if you think cities will face cost increases in providing services and hiring personnel in the next year. Raise your hand if you think 10% of voters should be able to essentially overturn a city budget. No hands, no hands. So this all relates to House Bill 2396 that the Senate made worse, that Representative Clayton was talking about, where a 10% protest petition could essentially overturn the city's mill levy, which would blow up the entire city budget. So in my view, the solution to those who do not like a city's tax policy is something that we already have, which is called our regular elections, where you all get to come vote for me or not vote for me, and vote for our city councils or not vote for our city councils. So I just wanted to do that polling of the room to give Senator Corson some ammunition as he goes into conference committee this week, and best of luck.
I have two questions. First one, SB4, the voting, taking away the 3-day voter protection period. I think that went to the governor's desk, and does she have to veto it by Monday? So what we should be doing about that as far as advocating for the legislature to sustain her veto, assuming she vetoes. And then lastly, just going into conference committees with the special education and the potential of them pushing that voucher bill, pieces of that, SB 87 into it, like just what we need to be advocating for.
So on SB4, this is the bill that would end the 3-day grace period that we've had in statute since 2017, that says that if a ballot is postmarked by election day and delivered to the election office on or before the end of business on the Friday after the election, that ballot is counted. So SB4 would get rid of that and say the ballot has to actually be received by the election office by 7 p.m. on election day. It is sitting on the governor's desk. I'm not sure exactly when it arrived on her desk, so I'm not sure when that 10-day clock that I spoke about, when that starts to run. But at some point, she will either have to sign it, let it go into law, or veto it. I'm almost certain that she would veto it. I've not spoken to her about that, but she has vetoed this previously. I'm almost certain that it'll be vetoed. In the Senate, unfortunately, there are definitely the votes to override that veto. I would be interested in what House colleagues would say about the numbers over there. But I think that, frankly, if this does become law over the governor's veto, I think there's just going to be a lot of voter education that's going to need to be done, of just making sure that all of the folks in our collective networks know about this new deadline, and that we're really clear that, hey, if you get your ballot mailed to you, the best thing to do is either return it to the election office or drop it off at a drop box. But if you absolutely have to mail your ballot, get it in the mail almost as soon as you get it, fill it out, put it back in the mail. So I think a lot of it, if it becomes law, is just going to be a voter education effort that we're all going to have to undertake. But again, we'd be curious if any House colleagues have a thought on kind of what the numbers there look like.
Yeah, my recollection of the House is that it'll be very, very close. I mean, the House members, there's more of them in rural areas, right? And this affects them far more than it affects our area. While it does affect our area, if we send a piece of mail, it goes to KC and then it kind of comes back here, right? If they send it from kind of central Kansas, still goes to KC and then goes back out. And then so, especially with the federal cuts, who knows how long mail is going to take out there. So I think there's a better chance in the House and the Senate, certainly. The vote count was pretty close, and it has been in previous years, but I would recommend just kind of looking at the vote count, seeing what rural legislators have voted against this in the past, and just telling them to hold the line on it.
So I just looked up the vote count, and it was 80 yay and 39 nay. Absent and not voting were Our Camp, Will Carpenter, Henry Helgerson, Scott Hill, Susan Ruiz, and Laura Williams. So of those absent, not missing, can they get 4 to override the veto? That'll be the question. To your second point, I think that I meant to give a shout out to our supers here, putting out that letter discussing the special education impact that the defunding has had upon our districts here locally. And I think the message there is just, it's easy. It's don't fund private schools, fund our special education. And, stick with that message as we move along through the process.
Yes, I think it's also worth noting that the chair of the House Election Committee was caught on a Zoom conference saying that he would like to get rid of advanced voting altogether. She would have to go to the polls on election day or your votes would not count. And that's ridiculous, but he's bound determined to get that done. So these votes are extremely important, keeping all that.
I was a little concerned about the dismissive reference to the Satanic Grotto earlier. This is a group that is protesting, essentially Christian nationalism, Christian fascism, which is rising in this country. Perhaps their method is clumsy, their message perhaps muddled by the way that they do it, but they do have First Amendment rights, and we talk about all of the things the legislature is doing to actively hurt people, people of color, children with special needs. When a group of Christians gets offended, the governor and the legislature takes action. I found it really troubling this week. So I'm interested in the response to that, and if there's something I'm missing, if there's something I'm wrong about there, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll address that. There was a resolution that came down this week, and I think most of us signed it, and it condemned the message that the satanic group was sending, but it totally supported their right to say it. That if you start eliminating the satanic religion out there, then what's next? I remember when I was a kid in 1960, and John Kennedy, the reason they didn't want him elected was because he was Catholic. And so it's a slippery slope when you deny any religion the right to express their opinions. That's what we're all about in this country.
Hi, I was on the committee that heard that resolution, so we had the hearing and had a pretty thorough discussion of it, and then moved on to the House floor. So a couple of things that were mentioned in that resolution, and a couple of backstory things. First of all, the bringer of the resolution, I believe, is going to be running for governor. And so I think that, there is a clause in the resolution that supports the First Amendment. So that is there. There is also a problem with the resolution because they list stolen property. The satanic group, and they're not, it's interesting because it's the Satanic Grotto, which is more of a First Amendment political group. But so they said that they had stolen a consecrated host. And so as someone who is Catholic and actually believes in transubstantiation, I was like, okay guys, there's no way that you could have gotten that out of the Catholic Church. So brought that up and said, all right, has this been proven? There was an article that came out in the Kansas City Star that apparently, so for those of you who are concerned about that, the Catholic Church has dropped their charges against the Satanic Grotto because it was proven, and they proved it with a receipt, that the hosts that they got were purchased off of Amazon. So again, it was, largely for show. So I come at this from an interesting standpoint, right? Because I support the First Amendment, but also if they were desecrating anything regarding, items of the Jewish faith, I would be like, hey, wait a minute, that's mean. So I think that it is appropriate for me as a legislator to A, question the whole stolen property thing, which I did both in committee and on the floor, and also to condemn, frankly, cruelty and mockery, because there is way too much of that going on. I strongly support the First Amendment, and I'm glad that they are still having their ritual and their protest. There will be a counter protest. And it's good. That is America. That is what should be happening. But also, as a legislator, I don't like it when people are mean and the Satanists are being mean. And so I can also speak out and say that type of cruelty is not something I stand by.
I have a question. How come Kansas, as a Republican state, isn't doing something about the dismantling and firing going on at the Haskell Indian Nations University here in Lawrence? They're just firing a bunch of people, and they're basically dismantling the school, and I would think the state of Kansas would do more to protest that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We really haven't addressed that too much. I think it's more of a question because it is more of a federal issue. It is that Haskell being the status that it has makes it's a federal institution, not a state institution like our other colleges and universities. So we don't really have direct control over it. There's little that we can do. I do think we should at least maybe vocalizing more concern and upset with it, but I know that folks have talked to Representative Davids and the rest of our congressional delegation, the rest of our two senators, I'm sure are hearing about it, but it is not something we've spent a tremendous amount of time on at the state level because we don't have a direct impact on Haskell, but it is, I agree, a real heart-wrenching story, and it's really wrong what's going on there for sure. We have 4 more minutes left, so we have these 2 questions, and then glad to stick around for any after.
With regard to water, so I've heard the whole fracking issue with wastewater or toxic water being pumped down into the ground, causing earthquakes and so forth with fracking. I've heard through the grapevine that Kansas has less requirements and is accepting water from other states, Arkansas, to be pumped into the ground. And I'm concerned about how that is going to affect the aquifer and our water table. Is there anything about that going on?
So that's a really good question. I intend to bring that up next year. We really haven't discussed fracking hardly at all, and the area down south of Wichita where they've had the earthquakes and so on like that, that's not really a big area around the aquifer that we're talking about in western Kansas. So, but that's an excellent observation, and it is something we need to look at, and I'll bring that up with the chair when we go back to Topeka this week.
That area is moving though.
Yeah.
It's mobile, so.
Yeah, it's going north a little bit too, yeah. And, but the aquifer that we're dealing with mostly is western Kansas. And, but that is something we'll bring up. Thank you for that.
There is a bill that has now been passed, I think by both houses, that will be in conference committee regarding support of fetuses. Do you have any idea what's going to happen with that, how that's going to be dealt with by the governor or in conference committee? Because it doesn't do anything more than what Kansas law already provides, other than say fetuses are people, basically.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little background, then I'll give you an answer. So this will be on the Senate Judiciary. This is a Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary Conference Committee, so I'll be on there as one of the Senate side of this. So what this bill does is it says that a pregnant woman can basically get child support pre-birth for the fetus. So child support for the cost of medical expenses and things like that. And it's, I think it's problematic because what it is, in my mind, an attempt to do is to put into Kansas statute this fetal personhood idea. And that's the idea that an unborn, unviable fetus should have the same rights as a 5-year-old child, right? That they should have same rights of being able to be eligible for child support. This is part of a movement that's going on nationwide by the pro-life activists to try to get this language into statute. And it really is part of a piece of what's going on if you look at the broader picture. Remember last year the state of Alabama banned IVF? One of the things that they relied on, that the Supreme Court relied on in doing that, was an Alabama statute that had similar language in it. So it's really an attempt to give a future Supreme Court the ability to look at Kansas law and say, well, Kansas has said that fetuses can get child support, so if that's the case, really it's just the same as a person, and so we should be able to ban abortion. And that really dovetails, going back to what Representative Sawyer Clayton and Representative Xu said, it really dovetails with this ability to elect judges. These are not just one-off, separate and distinct things. This is really part of to give them some credit, this is part of a long-term, multi-year plan to overturn the state Supreme Court finding that Kansans have a right to an abortion. So they really dovetail together. What happened on the Senate floor is that the bill was actually made much worse by an amendment that would say that not only can a woman collect child support for during the course of her pregnancy, but that actually every fetus in Kansas should get its own tax ID number. And that that you should be able to get a tax deduction for during the course of your pregnancy when there's not yet been a child born. So, for example, like, you know, we have 2 children, we have 2 dependents, so you get certain tax treatment, both federally and at the state level. And this would say that somebody who was 1 month pregnant was also entitled to get a deduction for that. So it really cements further into Kansas law this idea that we should think of a fetus as being on equal legal footing with people. So I think it's very problematic. I don't know exactly how it'll be dealt with. To circle back to the question, I don't know how it'll be dealt with in conference committee. I think there's some concern that the amendment that was put on is going to be complicated to administer, and that there are just sort of logistical questions about how that would actually work in operation, like if a woman was pregnant for part of the year and the pregnancy was lost, do you get to claim the tax credit? It just kind of, it was not a vetted, well thought through amendment, and so there are just a lot of questions about how that works. That may or may not come off, but we really do need to wrap up. I'm glad to stick around for any additional questions. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your time. And we will see you on the 4th Saturday in April. We'll be able to tell you how this great story ends. We'll tell you what happened with the end of session. Thank you.